Okay, so yeah, this is only the second time I've done this talk, so it's still developing, but it's based on sort of our recent experiences of our team in the past year. So my name's Lloyd. I work for Advanced Legal in Knutsford, doing software for solicitors. Joined there sort of start of the year in April. I'm a senior engineer, but coming into there, Advanced Legal's an XP shop. So day one, realised we've got to learn, get on board with pair programming, TDD, single piece flow, all the sort of practices and the mindset that comes with extreme programming. So I start off and pairing off with Andy, the lead dev there, who's he's sort of similar career path, but he's been far more down the XP route. So we're able to sort of work together quite well, and eventually we have Steve and Barry arrive as well, who are very similar to me. Is they've got sort of they're quite senior in their careers, but again never quite been down the XP route, and all this is quite new. On top of that, we've got the new domain. We don't know anything about solicitors. We've got a new code base. So there's this brand new team where Andy, the guy who's effectively our expert, and three people who are effectively starting from scratch, form this team. And we're all keen, and we're all there to learn and improve. But it's quite a daunting task on how we take this, effectively some new starters and one expert, and turn us into a productive team. So we start off by with pair programming. So we'll have two pairs who will just work on. We'll still do single piece flow, so each pair will pull the tasks for a particular work item, take it from there. We experiment a bit with what is called promiscuous pairing, so we do a coding dojo around that, and the idea behind that is that it's pair programming, but where you swap your partner at specific intervals. Now in the particular training we did, we were swapping partners every 10 minutes, which is not particularly conducive to getting work done, but it does highlight that the main sort of benefit of this kind of swapping is that it forces you to have a certain mindset, and that you're always explaining, or you have to be able to understand the work that you've been doing, because the time you've swapped twice, you're not the guy who started the work, and you've got to teach a newcomer coming into this pair exactly how everything works. So you have to get good at it quick, and good at it basically teaches you to communicate or bust effectively. And it's quite interesting, but we found it needed a lot of discipline to keep it going in our sort of mainstream of work, because we'd have, we're not in a coding dojo. Don't have these nice little tasks. We've got things coming from all directions. New priorities coming in, defects, and we found it's quite hard to keep up the sort of mental arithmetic of swapping partners, because we always felt that, well, actually, if we didn't do it for a bit, then maybe we'd get more done. And there was always that kind of pressure on it. So we didn't feel that held quite that well up to our sort of day-to-day working. Interestingly, the optimum, the agile scientists have been at this, and they've concluded about 90 minutes is optimal for a pair swap, which is probably a lot more than a lot of people are comfortable with, especially to start with. But it's something that we gave it a try, but it didn't quite work out for us. So life's good in the team, but we feel it can be better. We have things are going quite well. We're learning all our practices, picking up TDD, but there's still problems with flow. So one pair would be ahead of another pair, so that they'd finish early and not have a task, not have anything left to do, so they could join the other pair bit, which felt a little wasteful, or they could pick up what we call a slow lane task, which is effectively something that hasn't been prioritised or that could be dropped at any point, so it's effectively wasting the system. And this always felt never quite gelled. There wasn't quite that flow there. So we have a brown bag, and this is around July time, and it's mock programming, a whole team approach by Zuill. I'm not sure if some of you guys have seen it or not. Yeah. It's up on YouTube and Vimeo for those who haven't. And from it, we noticed that the mechanics of it, the idea of swapping a partner swapping a driver every 15, 20 minutes, whilst everyone else navigated and instructed on how a solution was going to be got to, was very similar to what we were doing in our coding dojos, where the whole point of those was to focus on learning, to optimize for learning. So it was quite interesting that sort of, the mechanics were quite similar, even unintentionally. We hadn't even heard of mob programming up until this particular point. and this is it summarised by Woody Zuill himself. It's all the brilliant people working at the same time, in the same space, at the same computer, and on the same thing. So the thing it brings to Agile is working on the same computer. That's really the sort of innovation here. So as a team, we decide we're quite impressed with the sort of reports that we get out of it, that they showed better productivity and sort of a general better feel. Obviously, you can watch the video to get exactly what precisely what they found. So we propose it's not something that we can ignore, so we have to try it. So we propose 1 week experiment, which we have buy-in for, where we mob everything we do. So whatever anyone chucks at us, we will work at one computer as a single entity. That we're not going to go and, I'll fix this by just going and tinkering for a second. Like, no, the whole point, experiment. You'll see what works and what doesn't. The whole point is to get some data out of it. And we take this week and we practice the mechanics, which we're already fairly used to, and we sort of fine-tune it. So we figure out that sort of a 15, basically, if everyone in the team has a go on the keyboard once in an hour, that seems like a nice kind of pace for us. But your mileage may vary. And the one thing is, at the end of that week, we had a retrospective. It's like, how are we doing? How does this feel? And to be honest, even before the end of the week, it was apparent that everyone was actually a lot more effective than we expected. We were expecting to feel that we were going slower. That's the obvious thing, because instead of everyone working on separate tasks, or all of a sudden we come down to one thing at a time, you would assume you would get half as much done compared to 2 pairs. But the evidence that we had with the tasks we completed and how long we know they'd roughly take us normally, the velocity hadn't changed. Whilst at the same time, we'd been a lot more aggressive with learning and our discipline in TDD, remembering we're all quite new to these kind of practices. So we'd been a lot more rigorous. We'd attacked technical debt a lot more, done tons of refactoring that we wouldn't normally have done, so the fearlessness and bravery spiked up. I think that's just a particular symptom of our code base, which is extremely legacy, to put it in fair terms. So this is our first station that we set up, and we're quite lucky to have this is our breakout space. It's probably equivalent to this, maybe a bit bigger. We have got our projectors up on the wall. This is actually 2 teams. It's from one of our dojo sessions, but we had 2 projectors, all the lights off, so our TANs took a serious hit for the month that we were in there. We had to block out all the light sensors and everything. It was quite terrible. But it worked really nicely because we had that freedom. We felt we're all together as a team, and that anyone who wanted, they knew where to find us. So it worked quite nicely. Eventually, after about a month, we get turfed out of there because we're taking up our shared space. Marketing want their projectors back, so we have to go back to our desks, and we're like, well, we want to keep mobbing, but we've got no gear, we've got no setup. It's just blocks of desks. It's sort of fairly standard layout. What do we do? So, we come up with a solution of sharing what the main driver's screen across as many monitors as we can, which we'd do we've got Link or Skype, which we just set up screen presentations. We tried Slack, Hangouts, and some various other tools. And the key thing was just everyone's still in the same group. You're just all looking at all looking at the same thing on different screens, so you don't end up hurting your neck. And for a team of 4 or 5 people, depending on who was in, it worked out okay. It's not ideal, but for probably a month or 2, it was perfectly functional, and we didn't felt like we'd lost that much. Which does mean that it's a lot cheaper an experiment that we made it. So we were quite lucky to have those projectors and the space to start off with. But if we didn't have that and we still wanted to try it, we realised that we could do. So eventually, this is our sort of final form that we've evolved to now, where we've gone to a more sort of face-to-face conference-style setup, where we get rid of all the monitors in the middle of the desks, clear out, well, as you can see, nearly all the crap out of the way, and we just have one big screen that we all refer to. And the key point of this is that we feel it immediately obvious that it opened up the team. You know, you've got your face-to-face, you have more discussions, it becomes more the focus of the work. You stop worrying about, you know, a small part of your day, which is typing the code, and start paying attention to the big part of your job, which is reasoning and working out the best sort of designs and strategy and figuring out what it is you should be doing. What is the most optimal thing you can be doing? And it's tough to get that without having those discussions. So we really like that it's this particular setup. So off the back of our retrospective, that was just sort of the technical sort of mechanics of the setup. So the main thing, the sort of key points that came out of our initial retrospective, the big one was the ability to share learning within a mob environment. So as I've already said, we've got Andy the expert with a load of guys who are new to XP, and the sort of one-to-one teaching you can do. You know, everyone's self-learning, but there's still, to get up to speed, you want to get up there as fast as possible. No one wants to feel like they're lagging behind. So the one-to-one teaching, it's very much limited by the people who are available and the people who can teach. And at the same time, a more sort of group environment where you can go, okay, we'll have a kata on, TDD or whatever. It's less personal, it's less targeted. So there's some, you know, it's good practice, but it's not seen as work, so it's very much outside of it. You don't necessarily work on your work problems while you're doing it, and it doesn't really account for where each person's up to in their particular development along all the various paths that they can do. And we found that once we're all in a mob, that it's actually all the learning is built into team life. So everyone will learn a different thing at different time as someone will pick up TDD a bit faster, someone will go and learn about something about sort of lean flow or what have you, and effectively over time you'll notice that the one expert, everyone soaks up different bits of what he's been teaching them, and you get sort of this cross-pollination of learning from all these different sources. So you get this sort of more holistic effect where you don't sort of pair with someone and teach them a certain thing, and then if they accidentally take the wrong thing away from it, then you end up with a bit of a mess until the next person who can actually see that it's a mess comes along and says, no, you've misunderstood. You kind of don't get that because everyone's is sort of following each other. There's a lot less sort of misunderstanding, and everyone gets sort of a more rounded. I mean, this applies to anything you're doing. It's the same with the code base, with the domain. All the learning that comes into the mob gets distributed to everyone there. It's not a case of, well, that guy knows about this, that guy knows about the server. If you're in the mob, there's no way you can avoid learning about something. Next big one is freedom. So this was something that Andy, our lead developer, noted, is that when he was pair programming with people, if he had to, frequently he would have to go off to a meeting, or he'd have some other kind of commitment that came with him being more senior. And if he left someone who was more junior in a pair, then he'd come back and he'd usually find that either the person hadn't got anywhere, or had done something just completely wrong, and they have to go back and explain it. And he felt that the work stopped, and that person's learning stopped. He wasn't there to sort of guide them. Whereas as soon as we switch to a mob setup, because you've got those extra people who are all learning the different facets at the same time, he could actually step outside of the mob for, an hour or so, and when he came back, he had more confidence that we hadn't just sort of veered off down some trench and he'd have to come back and save the day. And it was very much a concern for him, and it sort of took that weight off his shoulders that, and it's probably specific to our particular circumstances where he was having to do a lot of teaching at the same time. But it does mean that as long as there shouldn't in the mob, there's no sort of one key person, because everyone understands what you're doing. You can take one person out, whether if they go on a holiday or going to a meeting, and it'll just keep going. It also helps spread the strain, so people are having bad days, if they're sick or they haven't slept or they just can't concentrate for whatever reason. The mob can sort of account for that. There's not a bump or anything. Obviously if someone's can't work properly for days on end, then that's a problem to be addressed. But if you're having a bad day, it helps you through that. So the next one is people outside the mob and actually getting them on board, because it's not just, you can't develop something with just a team of developers and a tester. It does need more than that. So we found that it was incredibly easy for our product owners, UX specialists, security performance guys. They could drop in and out. They could come and work with us as we're working on features. Whenever we felt it was necessary, they can come and do check-ins, and it was whoever they asked in the team, they got a full description of where we were up to. It wasn't like this sort of information was just with one particular person. So they can just slot into the team, work with us for a bit, and then go back to whatever they were doing. The other plus is we've got all our developers aren't necessarily at one of our sites, so we may have to have one of our support guys over in sort of Grantham Way, or someone up in Hull who's got a problem, they've found a defect, or they've got a particular bit of understanding about some aspect of what we're trying to sort out. They can just join the mob via remote tools. Again, we tested, it's very similar to our screen sharing, but we tested the various ones out. We found out that WebEx, unfortunately, was by far the best for that. It's sort of, you could actually code live whilst talking to people. When you weren't even in the office, you've got the webcams up, so it's almost like they're there, and it sort of gets rid of that. They just become involved in the whole conversation. It's quite nice for people who have to work from home as well, because there's no danger that they're working on their own thing and they feel somehow disconnected, which I know can be an issue, because they're in the whole, they're part of the conversation throughout the whole day. There is no separate work. And the final one is that patient zero can stay at home. So that person who feels like they're not actually ill, but they're probably a bit contagious, but they still don't feel like staying at home, well, they can actually stay at home. We've had that a couple of times. So when the Christmas snuffles start up, they can still work from home with us like nothing had changed, which was quite a nice bit of freedom for them. Not sure how much it affects you guys here, but we had certain issues of a division between dev and test. However small we try and make that wall, some of our process still felt like we were building something and then chucking it over a very tiny wall to test. We do some dev testing, but the actual test specialists were separate. So the first thing we did was we got our tester and we dragged them into the mob. So they're always working with us now. Sometimes they'll be working on the code if we're developing, we're writing any automated tests over stuff, or they'll be pulling build downs as we're developing and sort of checking as we go, making sure the software's still up and working whilst we continue developing. It means that you've got more eyes on quality at the right time. So there's you want to know if you've got quality issues. You want to know if you've got the wrong end of the stick or the wrong scenarios as soon as possible. And that's something that our testers are really good at. They're sort of really tuned into. And having them working with us means we get these questions earlier, so that when we're done, we have more confidence that we're actually done, and not that we'll have to go round in a little weird dev test loop as we have done in the past. So, sort of one of the final things, which is less to do with our output, but it's we felt that actually using mod programming as our main mode of production actually transformed the team in quite a positive way. So, and this again, the top line comes from Zuill again, is the three things that he thought that needed to be in a team to be able to take on mod programming was kindness, consideration, and respect for each other. So the sort of three key points is you have to, because you're working with these people all day on the same task, these have to be the forefront in your minds. So as soon as you hit a lack of consensus, you can treat that as a smell. So the fact that you guys fundamentally, if you don't agree on something, and you end up getting into an actual debate about it, it's not just a case of, well, tabs or spaces, no one cares. As soon as you get into a design discussion that you feel you're intractable on, the team can actually identify that is that there's either the problem's too big, or there's some misunderstanding in the team. There's a bit of learning that's missing, some domain knowledge. Because I'm not sure where this quote comes from, I forget where I heard it, but that when you encounter these problems, that's actually useful data. It's something that your team could work on. That is the data in your team. When you disagree, not everyone's aligned, and there's got to be a reason there, so you have to kind of stop and go and figure out why it is you don't agree. If it's just someone going, well, I always, functional or object orientated, if that's your disagreement, then you've got more of a cultural issue. But if it actually comes down to a design approach or a technical solution, you can generally, by either breaking it down or getting further into the domain of the issue, reach that consensus we've found. The other part of that is that you can't sort of let your ego get in the way of working together, which it's a big problem. When you start pairing or whatever, you generally start out developing in your early life on your own, and then as you mature and join businesses, you end up working in teams, and this gets towards the more extreme end of it. You have to sort of curb that sort of urging you to think that I am always right and I have to sort of get my own way, and this is possibly me projecting slightly here. It's the solution that comes out has to be good enough. If you spend all day sort of polishing and arguing over variable naming, class naming, and how things should be composed exactly, if there's no business value between the two, and it's just much for muchness, as long as you're consistent throughout your decisions, you can kind of just leave it high and just be more productive that way by not having to get into minutiae of particular things. There's also no hiding from people, so if you'll probably end up we've had some sort of conflicts between personalities who have 4 very different personalities coming from very different backgrounds, or who like doing things different ways, but we can turn that, and we have so that people use that particular focus and their backgrounds to address different sides of things. So one guy's more tuned into the domain side, and he will tend to lead on the learning and tasks around that. Someone's far more down onto his TDD, and will keep a discipline around that if he feels the group slipping. The final sort of key point there is we brought in, before we did this, we had retros very infrequently, like every couple of months maybe if someone organised them, and they were sort of 2-hour affairs that we never really felt were that useful. But one of the first things we started doing was having regular retros. We did them daily. I think we're down to probably 3 or 4 a week now, which is pretty much almost daily. And we feel that at the end of the day, because you've been everything's so concentrated and focused all day, it gives you've got that space coming at the end of the day to sort of unwind and talk things over with people without having to worry about getting the work done as such. It gives you a chance to resolve those conflicts which come up, personality clashes, or generally misunderstandings with people. You expect different things. And it's probably one of the biggest sources of respect for my teammates that's coming out from these retros, is having these discussions. I've never respected them more that when they've said, they've said to someone in the team, actually what you did when this, was, it's disrespectful, or, they bring people up on it, and we could have a mature conversation about it, move on, and ultimately become a better team from it. So the final sort of thing that came out of this is this idea of the mob consciousness, which is, if you're working on your own or a pair, generally your own faults are hardest to spot. You're not on the outside looking in. When you're working in a mob, everyone in the team is responsible for discipline. So you've got values that you adhere to, you've got your technical practices, and it's the job of everyone inside there. We found that everyone would keep a focus on it. If someone sort of slipped and just like, oh, we'll just bash this thing together, you'd have another person who would come back and say, well, actually, no, are we addressing the right problem? Have we got the right tests around it before we start refactoring? That kind of thing. And it's quite nice because it gives the people who are newer to certain things a chance to tell off people who've been doing it much longer when they eventually slip and say, no, hang on. So it validates their learning in a way, gives them sort of a bit of empowerment there that they have the power to stop the mob and go, actually, we've agreed that we value these practices and these principles, let's stick to them. And you get a better chance of catching the problems early. So the big one, and I think in any software, is, are we actually building the right thing in the right way? Not how fast are we building something. Is it actually being built correctly? Is there something, should we even continue doing this? Is there a waste of time? Should we get some feedback? It's the key sort of the core of agile development. And you've got the more people with the eyes on it who can stop it earlier if there's no value in continuing. And we're still going strong. So we still mob everything. This is, what's it now, December time. We started this early August, I think, late July. We've got that sort of great team alignment. We're really sort of closely knit now. We've got consistent values and practices, and a more consistent code base. So the code that we work on looks like it's been written by one developer, as opposed to various different people with their own quirks and idiosyncrasies. We've even built our own team charter, which is something that we've got from the Lean Dev Conference. So we effectively write down 5 values and principles that our team believes in, and include them in our retrospectives to say, are we actually being true to these kinds of things? So keep the team together and make sure we kind of maintain that ethos. So final few slides are just some questions that I've asked the guys at various points during our process. So what did we think when we started mobbing? That it sounds mental, shouldn't work, but you can't ignore the benefits. So we saw, what he was saying, well, we get through loads more tasks when we're mobbing than when we don't. We have to at least try that. Highly skeptical, someone who'd only just bought into pairing, how can it actually scale without losing productivity? It's one of those things which it doesn't make sense on the face of it. You've got more people doing fewer tasks, so how can you get more done? But the fact that those tasks get done better and the right tasks get done seems to kind of produce that productivity. So how do people's thoughts change over time? It definitely works, but we're still not quite sure why. Initial guesses were the communication within the team and a better single piece flow from the fact that everyone's working on one thing. You can't not have single piece flow. Or it's very difficult to mess it up in this particular scenario. And then gobsmacked on how it fitted together, and it sort of brought that team together naturally, which is described. And then finally, just a few bits of advice for others trying it. Be open-minded and give it a go. Be nice to people, which was one of the first things that came out of our retros. So one of our first action was be nice to people. Inside the mob, outside the mob, don't, because we were a bit isolated to start with inside that room. It's like, go out, be nice to people, talk to people, make sure we don't just become this little sort of microcosm of development. And then finally, it doesn't sound like it should work, but it does. That's what we've found. So, yeah, thanks for listening. I'm not sure how we're doing for time, but
yeah, we've got time. I'm guessing people might have questions. I know I've got at least one. So, are you happy to take some questions?
Yeah, sure.
Anyone want to kick off?
So, how do you work with like business analysts? Do they kind of like sit with the mob, or are they kind of like separating your?
No, the BAs be equivalent to sort of a product owner at our place. So they'd be with the team for kick-offs. So we take our next backlog item, whatever that happened to be. We don't manage a backlog. We just pick them up. We say, give us the most important one. Then we'd sit down with our BAs, break it into vertical slices that they understand, because generally they give us stuff that's too big. They say, can we have this 6-week feature? And we go, no, you can have 6 1-week features, which we reckon should be like that. So we work with them like that. They'll touch in with us whenever they feel the need to. If we've got questions, we'll go to them. That they do work separately, but when they need to, they can come and sit with us. It's generally quite smooth, and then at the end, for kind of a sign off, when everyone's happy that all the scenarios been met, we'll do a quick demo to them, which we've started recording now because occasionally people can be away and timetables are tough. But we'll do a little product demo at the end of a slice.
I had a question about testers.
Yes.
Because I wasn't sure I understood. You said the testers are part of the mob, but you said something about testers doing tests in parallel while you're deving.
Yes.
So does that mean that the whole team doesn't get involved in running a test at the same time? How does it work?
Okay, so the entire team is involved in the scenarios, the developing of unit tests, integration tests, UI tests, all the automated stuff we do. Everyone's involved in that, running them, making sure they're continuously passing. A lot of the work we do is actually quite a lot of refactoring and tackling technical debt, which we found that it's not too useful for the testers to be involved with, because we're not changing behaviour. We have tests in place. Maybe 50% of our work is refactoring stuff, which I think is quite a high percentage as far as stuff goes. But it's one of those we've made the business decision to tackle this now, and it's going to take a big chunk of investment. So when we're doing that, when we literally can't think of something for a tester to do, and they'd otherwise sit there bored, they'll pull builds down and start doing mini regressions, or sort of working out what's coming next, or just that's when they'd start pulling builds, and they can do it as we're going along. As well, they still sit with a mob, but they'll just have their laptop and pull the latest version down. But generally, we try and work with them on the same computer as much as possible, because as soon as you start splitting off onto other things, then it kind of gets it's easy to keep doing that. We've found a lot of force on just stay together.
Have you been tempted to go back to pairing? Because it sounds like you had a learning curve which you've kind of got over by mobbing.
Yeah.
Have you been tempted to go back to pairing and see how the team performs compared to mobbing after what you've learned?
We haven't. No, we're quite as a mode of production. We haven't felt that way, and sort of what's validated it is the fact that there's another team who works on our product who is full of people who've worked on the software for 3+ years, going up to 12 years. The team are effectively veterans, and they've moved. They've been pairing and doing the whole TD thing. They've moved to mob programming. They switched it. They did the same experiment we did, and found that they've got a lot more experience and working that flow. That mobbing felt better, and we haven't yet found something other than when there's 2 people in a mob not in any kind of desire to go back.
Sorry, so just want to know how you measure mob
being of advantage than peering. Why are they doing the peering stuff? Do you measure what you do on weekly basis by points or by the number of tickets you actually do to have comparison between the two?
Yeah, effectively, when we break our stuff down into what we consider to be stories, we do 1 week stories. So we break things into down what are roughly equal units, and then we derive a velocity from that. So we know if everything starts taking less than a week, we're going faster, and if things consistently take more than a week, we're going slower. So we have a little variance graph, and it's not moved. So that's the sort of measurement we use. Is everything used to take with 2 pairs about a week to do, everything still takes about a week to do with a mob. So it hasn't really changed that, but we're probably doing more in that week, because we've upped the amount of refraction and technical debt we're tackling as part of each story. Does that help?
Touched on in one of your earlier slides about making things good enough.
Yeah.
Does that mean, from your experience, that the mob has self-checked on gold plating when it started to drift down that route?
Yeah, pretty much. It's quite nice for that, because I presume people are familiar with losing sight on what it is you're actually trying to develop here. It's quite a common problem, and there's always at least one person who is sort of stepped back a little bit, and everything new that we do, should we actually be doing this? Is this refactoring worth it? There's some which definitely are. There's a lot of it, well, we're just faffing around at this point, so let's call it a day and move on.
The other question I've got is about blockers that you don't have any way of influencing from the mob. Does that just stop the entire mob and everyone goes off and does something else? Well, it's unblocked, or do they swarm on unblocking it to whatever degree they can? Let's say it's blocked by something external.
So what are you talking about? Something that's more important than the work we're doing?
Something that's part of the work that's being delivered.
So if you can't proceed because you need something from a third party who isn't present, so you literally cannot continue with what you're doing.
You might raise, a ticket with them, and they say, well, it'll be 3 days before we get round to that. Does the mob stop for 3 days? Does the mob pick up something else which would seem wrong? Do you how has that come up? Maybe it hasn't, so you may not have an answer.
We've not necessarily had those kind of blockers where it's been the work we're doing, because it's with the stuff we're on, it's been quite simple to identify those kind of impediments ahead of time. But there has been stuff recently where more higher priority stuff will come in. So we're working on the feature for the next release, and a release was just gone out to a client side. They're having crippling performance problems, and there's no one else who can work on it. So at that point, we do have to go, well, the approach we've taken so far is effectively getting to a point in our flow where we've finished a particular task, just packaging it all up, pulling it down to one side of the board, and then just mobbing this thing which needs to be blocked. So we should always be working on the most important thing, whatever that is, for whatever reason.
Yeah, I think that makes sense from, if you've got a live issue and you're working on something that's not going to be going live straight away, then obviously the live issue would need to take precedence. But I'm thinking about when
if you can't continue,
that doesn't happen, you're merrily working away, and on a Tuesday afternoon something needs to be done that's external to the team that you have no way of influencing, or external to the company, and it just means that for the next 24 hours you can't physically do any useful work on that ticket, that single piece flow. What would you do then? You've probably not had, it sounds like you haven't had the issue, but what would you imagine you would do?
We've not run anything of the scale of days. The typical response would probably be we run 20% time in our office. So, 1 day a week, we're not working on backlog stuff anyway. We're not working on features. So we would probably, we don't really want to start work on the next most important thing, because that knackers the flow. So we'd either pull something from a technical backlog, like working on the pipeline. There's still our backlogs aren't we effectively have two backlogs. We have stuff product wants and stuff we know we need to do, which is not the greatest way of managing it, and we're in a transitional process on getting that into one backlog. But at the moment we'd either pick something, sort out smoke tests, or we're working towards continuous deployment, some aspect of that. Worst case scenario, we just call 20% time and everyone goes and works on personal projects or whatever. We have that built into a week or a month, and if it happens that we do 2 days in a week, the next 2 weeks we might only do half a day. So it's sort of if it's blocked and there's nothing more important to do, we won't pick up the next task. We'll just do something that we can effectively drop as soon as we can get back on it. And it works quite nicely.
Do you have any issues with sort of wallflowers? People who will sit in the corner and ignore the group?
We've got issues with people who are quiet and don't necessarily don't engage with discussions as much as other people do. Because we set up, we sit effectively like this, it's heads up, and there's 4 or 5 of us. There's not a lot of places to hide. So if someone's not contributing in any way whatsoever and resists, if someone's not contributing, there's obviously a problem there, so we will attempt to engage them. If you get sort of pushback off that, as we've had with one particular guy, we'll bring it up in the retro. So the idea of the retros is that it's a safe space that we can talk about things which are stopping people. If they're don't feel they're able to contribute, is there some learning they need to work on? Some one-to-one time we can do. Are they just? Is it a confidence problem? And because it's going to be different with every person, it's really down to those retros to the whole team's responsibility in the retros and when you're working, just to include as much as possible. We've not had wallflowers, but we've had people who didn't want to do things. So that's not the way I do it, and you kind of chip them down over time, and then they eventually realise that actually, I'm being a bit daft.
I had a similar question, which I think more or less answered, or maybe not. Which is that personally, do you ever find that if there's so many people working on something, that it might be quite easy to just sort of drift off, not necessarily always be 100% engaged, and maybe kind of drift off into a daydream and then think, oh, hang on a minute, I have no idea what just happened in the last 10 minutes.
Yep.
And what happens in that scenario? Do you just be completely honest and say, look, sorry, you lost me for 10 minutes, can you tell me what just happened? Or what?
100% that. Like, if there's some reason you can't focus, go and take a break. It's like, if you need to go and sit in a dark room for an hour, if that's what it's going to be to get you back in the team, go and do it. Work's going to continue. There'll be a bit of catch up, but it's better than you sat there in a bog-eyed in a coma or whatever. Or we have people who's like, well, they come in and say, I got an hour's sleep last night because of the train, the cat, whatever. I'm not going to be much use. And now they're honest up front. And it's like, fair enough. Contribute when you can, as long as you sit there and pay some attention. Our latest edition actually falls asleep, which is something that we're still tackling quite how to engage. So they'll flip from extreme conviction around a certain bit of code that they've just seen to falling asleep. So, and we're not quite sure what the switch is there or what the stimulation is. But it's the kind of thing that if it happens, everyone has bad days. If it happens consistently, you deal with it in retros, and then you deal with it in your tech lead one-to-ones, and then that there's a process for if someone's got a serious problem. But if it's just having a bad day, we just soak it up in the mob.
You mentioned that it was good for team bravery. Have you ever had any problems where the team groups tend to be less bothered about risk taking than individuals? Have you countered teams becoming a bit
cavalier?
Yeah, going off the boundary.
It seems to it works in the mob because we all buy into the idea that that the only reason we can be brave is because we've got the checks and balances. So if we go and refactor something, it's because we've spent the time putting characterization tests over it. That discipline seems to work where you don't. If someone wants to be a bit cavalier, the other people will kind of pull them back a bit. Now, it's interesting from the other team of the sort of Longbeards, looking at the kind of stuff they've been doing, it's a lot more sort of cavalier, because they would pair, or maybe not even pair, because it's just trivial, I'm just writing some tests. The kind of stuff they're doing is a lot sort of sketchier. When you boil into it, it's like, well, actually that test's complete nonsense, or that's not good enough, effectively. We don't go and accuse them of your code's terrible, but when you look at it, it's like, well, these guys could be doing better. Since they've become a mob, that they have a lot more discussions about code cleanness, code quality. You can't just, like, if you're having a bad day, but you still need to get something done, you can't just sort of, whatever, I'll get it done in, and skip a few tests or whatever, because other people can see you doing it. Does that answer the question?
How did you find it was received outside of the mob, outside of IT, both before and after? I guess after, if you've been more productive, then everyone goes, fantastic, it's brilliant. Before they hear the words about programming and only working on one thing, and they go, not sure about that.
Everyone was quite curious about it, so we had a lot of sort of C-level people popping in to see what's going on. We had one project manager who lives in spreadsheets, just couldn't get it. He didn't understand what was going on, but he just went back to his spreadsheets. Generally, because the teams are, self-organising, we can pick however we want to get stuff done. Product or some areas of the business don't generally intrude and say you need to do it this way. They just need to say, how can we get this done, and they rely on us to pick the best way. And we monitor things. We don't get any slower, and we increase the quality significantly. So we've not really given them much cause. The only problem is the sort of grumbling can come in when it's like, we come to an area of a system where it's just broken, there's been a live defect, this thing's completely broken because there's no testing around it, no automated testing. Someone's wiggled something over here and that's gone on fire over there. We'll go, no, actually, we can't just fix it and push it out in a hotfix. You can get the hotfix out, but we're also going to spend more time, now the customer's happy, putting belt and braces around it, putting those tests over it to make sure it doesn't go again. And it's been a bit of a journey to get product to go, actually, yes, that's a good idea, because it's not the next most burning thing for them. So there's a bit of a give and take there, but they generally understand that it wouldn't be on fire on the first place if we'd done it properly the first time round. And the first time round is over the 15-year lifespan of this application.
Have you found there's, I guess, an upper limit to how many people you should have in a mob?
Depends what you're trying to do. For day-to-day work, we've been up to 6. 4 devs and a tester seems to work quite nicely, and then extra sort of special guests can pop in and out. We haven't tried any more. Our coding dojos are generally 10 to 20 people, but we're optimising for learning as opposed to outcomes. Well, sorry, we're still optimising for outcomes, it's just a different drive. So if we stop and have a big discussion, it's not a big deal. But the format still works with 10 people. I just wouldn't have a team of... I think there is diminishing returns on that sort of productivity, yeah. But we've not done any... That's me just guessing, basically.
Yeah.